The gunshot that tore through Thomas McCarthy's shoulder sent him tumbling from his horse into a ravine west of Carson City, Nevada, and when he finally crawled into a sheltered alcove beneath an overhang of rock, he could barely keep his eyes open long enough to press his bandana against the wound before darkness claimed him entirely. Delilah Warren had been tracking the wild mustangs for 3 days when she found him. She had left her father's ranch at dawn with only her saddlebags and her mare, determined to bring back proof that the legendary golden stallion still roamed these hills. Her father thought she was visiting her cousin in town, and she intended to keep it that way. At 22 years old, she was tired of being treated like a china doll that might shatter at the first sign of real work. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she guided her mare through the rocky terrain, scanning the ground for hoofprints. That was when she saw the blood. Dark red droplets led her eyes toward the alcove, and her heart hammered against her ribs as she dismounted, drawing the small revolver her mother had given her before she died. The man lay crumpled against the stone, his hat fallen beside him, his shirt torn and soaked with blood. His chest still rose and fell, shallow but steady. Delilah holstered her weapon and knelt beside him, her practical nature taking over. She had helped birth calves and stitch up ranch hands often enough. This was just another body that needed tending. She worked quickly, building a small fire and heating water from her canteen. The bullet had passed clean through, which was lucky for him. She cleaned the wound as best she could, tearing strips from her spare shirt to bind it properly. His face was weathered and handsome in a rough way, probably close to her own age, maybe a year or two older. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and several days of stubble shadowed his jaw. As the sun began its descent, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and purple, Delilah realized she would have to stay the night. Moving him was impossible, and leaving him alone meant certain death from exposure or predators. She unsaddled her mare and set up a makeshift camp, rationing her supplies carefully. The man Thomas, though she did not know his name yet, remained unconscious through the evening. She checked his wound twice, relieved to see no signs of infection yet. Tomorrow she would need to get him to proper help, but for now keeping him alive through the night was victory enough. She ate jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water, and then settled against the rock wall with her rifle across her lap. The desert grew cold after dark, and she built up the fire, watching the flames dance and cast shadows across the stranger's face. It was near midnight when she noticed his shirt. The tear from the bullet went straight through the fabric, and smaller rips scattered across the shoulders and back, likely from his tumble down the ravine. Without thinking too much about it, she retrieved her sewing kit from her saddlebag. Idle hands made for a restless mind, and she needed something to occupy herself during the long night watch. She carefully eased the shirt off him, trying not to disturb his bandages. His torso was lean and muscular, marked with old scars that spoke of a hard life. She laid the shirt across her lap and threaded her needle by firelight, beginning the patient work of mending. The rhythm of stitching calmed her nerves, in and out, pulling the torn fabric back together. She worked on the smaller tears first, the ones on the shoulders where the fabric had caught on rocks. Her stitches were small and neat, learned from her mother, who had been the finest seamstress in Carson City before consumption took her 5 years ago. She was halfway through repairing the bullet hole, working to salvage what she could of the fabric when she sensed the change. The man's breathing had shifted, becoming less deep. Delilah kept her hands steady, continuing her work, but her awareness sharpened. Thomas McCarthy woke to confusion and pain. His shoulder burned like hellfire, and his mouth felt full of cotton. Slowly, carefully, he opened his eyes. Firelight flickered against stone walls. He was in some kind of alcove or small cave, and there was a woman. She sat near the fire, bent over something in her lap, her needle catching the light as she worked. It took his foggy brain a moment to realize she was sewing his shirt, his torn, bloodied shirt, which meant he was not wearing it. "You are awake," she said without looking up from her stitching. Her voice was low and calm, with a hint of warmth that did not match the wariness he saw in her posture. "Where am I?" His voice came out as a croak. "About 15 miles west of Carson City. I found you yesterday afternoon, shot and half dead." She tied off a thread and bit it clean, finally meeting his eyes. "You are welcome, by the way." Thomas tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through his shoulder, and he fell back with a grunt. "Do not be foolish," she said sharply. "That wound is fresh, and you have already lost enough blood. Lie still." "Who shot me?" he asked, and then the memories came flooding back. The ambush on the trail. 3 men, faces covered with bandanas. They had been after the money he was carrying, payment for the horses he had sold in Virginia City. He had managed to shoot one of them before taking a bullet himself, and then his horse had panicked and sent him tumbling. "I was hoping you could tell me that." The woman returned to her sewing. "I am Delilah Warren. My father owns the Double W Ranch east of Carson City." "Thomas McCarthy." He watched her work, the sure movements of her hands. "You have been taking care of me." Someone had to. She glanced at him briefly. "Do you have people who will be looking for you?" "Not likely. I was traveling alone and nobody expects me back in Carson City until next week." He flexed his fingers, testing his body's responses. Everything worked, though his shoulders screamed in protest. "Those men who shot me, they will be long gone by now." "Probably spent your money on whiskey and cards." Delilah finished the last stitch on the bullet hole and held up the shirt, examining her work in the firelight. "It is not perfect, but it will hold." "You did not have to do that. Like I said, idle hands." She folded the shirt and set it aside. "You should drink some water. I will heat some broth if you think you can keep it down." Over the next hour, Thomas managed to drink water and eat some of the thin broth Delilah made from her supplies. His strength returned slowly, enough that he could prop himself up against the rock wall without feeling like he might pass out. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked, as she banked the fire for the night. "Women do not usually travel these hills by themselves." "Women do not usually do a lot of things." Her tone carried an edge. "I was tracking the Mustang herd. There is a golden stallion that runs with them, and I wanted to see it for myself." The legend. Thomas knew the stories. Every rancher and cowboy in Nevada had heard tales of the golden Mustang, wild and untamable, that supposedly brought good fortune to anyone who saw it. "You believe in that?" "I believe in what I can see with my own eyes, and I have seen the tracks, the descriptions from reliable men. So yes, I believe there is a golden stallion out there." She settled down with her back against the opposite wall, rifle close at hand. "My father thinks I was visiting my cousin." "Rebellious, practical. He would never have let me go otherwise, and I am tired of being kept in a cage just because I wear skirts." She pulled her blanket around her shoulders. "You should sleep. We will figure out how to get you back to town in the morning." But sleep did not come easily for Thomas. His shoulder throbbed, and his mind raced with questions. Who was this woman who had saved his life? She spoke with the confidence of someone used to being heard, yet there was a loneliness in her eyes that he recognized. He had seen it in his own reflection often enough. Morning brought harsh sunlight and the realization that Thomas was in no condition to ride. Delilah checked his wound, relieved to see it was not festering, and rebandaged it with strips torn from another spare shirt. "We will stay here today," she decided. "You need rest, and I need to scout for water. My canteen is nearly empty." "I can manage alone," Thomas protested, but even he heard the weakness in his voice. "Sure you can." Delilah's tone was dry. "Just like you managed to not get shot. I will be back before noon. Do not do anything stupid while I'm gone." She left him with water and her extra blanket, then saddled her mare and rode north toward where she remembered seeing cottonwood trees, a sign of water in this harsh landscape. Thomas watched her go, grudgingly impressed by her competence. Alone in the alcove, he examined his surroundings more carefully. Someone, Probably Delilah had arranged their supplies neatly against one wall. His own saddlebags were there, though his horse was nowhere to be seen. His gun belt hung from a rock outcropping, and his rifle leaned nearby. She had not taken anything, had not left him defenseless. That spoke to her character. He found his shirt, folded carefully, and held it up to examine her handiwork. The stitches were small and even, the kind that would hold under strain. She had taken time and care with something that most people would have considered trash. That spoke to her character, too. Delilah returned just before noon, as promised, with both canteens full and news. "There's a ranch about 10 miles northeast of here. I saw the buildings from the high ground. If you can sit a horse tomorrow, we can make it there by evening." "I can ride," Thomas said, more from determination than certainty. "We will see." She set about making a proper meal from their combined supplies, mixing flour and water to make pan bread over the fire. "Tell me about yourself, Thomas McCarthy. Are you a rancher? A drifter?" "I breed horses," he said, watching her work. "Bought a small spread north of Carson City 2 years ago. I have been building up my herd, selling to the army and the mining companies. That must be profitable. Enough to get by. Not enough to make me rich, but I am my own man. That is worth more than gold." He paused. "What about you? What does the daughter of a ranch owner do with her days besides sneak off to chase wild horses?" "Everything my father will let me do, which is not nearly enough." She flipped the bread in the pan. "I can rope and ride as well as any of his hands. I know the business inside and out. But he treats me like I'm made of glass ever since my mother died. He thinks if I work too hard or venture too far, I will break." "So you prove him wrong whenever you get the chance." "Exactly." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. They were both people fighting for their place in a world that wanted to define them narrowly. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Delilah cleaned his wound again. Her touch was gentle but sure, and Thomas found himself acutely aware of her nearness, the scent of sage and leather that clung to her clothes. "You have done this before," he observed. "Ranch life teaches you many things. I have stitched up men and animals both." She secured the new bandage. "You are healing well. You must have a strong constitution." "Stubborn," my mother always said. "Stubbornness has its uses." She sat back on her heels. "Those men who shot you, do you think they will come back looking for you?" "Doubtful. They got what they wanted, and searching these hills for a body would be more trouble than it is worth." He frowned. "But I would feel better if you were armed when you scout. Keep your pistol where you can reach it quick." "I always do." She patted the revolver at her hip. "I am not foolish, Thomas. Careful and cautious. That is how you survive out here." The day passed slowly. Thomas slept fitfully, while Delilah kept watch and tended the camp. When evening came, she cooked another simple meal, and they talked more, sharing stories of their lives. Thomas told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west after the war to find a new start. Delilah spoke of her childhood on the ranch, of her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's increasing protectiveness after her death. "He means well," she said, staring into the fire, "but sometimes love can be a prison." "Sometimes," Thomas agreed, "and sometimes the people who love us just need to learn to trust that they raised us strong enough to handle what comes." She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw something shift in her expression. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe just the acknowledgement that she was not alone in her struggle. That night, as they settled into sleep on opposite sides of the fire, Thomas found himself thinking less about the bullet wound in his shoulder and more about the woman who had saved him. There was something about Delilah Warren that called to him, something beyond her obvious beauty and competence. She had a fire inside her, a determination that matched his own. Morning of the second full day brought renewed strength. Thomas managed to stand and walk the length of the alcove without feeling dizzy, though his shoulder still ached fiercely. Delilah watched him critically. "You will ride behind me," she declared. I do not trust you to stay in the saddle on your own. I have been riding since I was 5 years old, and I have been patching up stubborn men since I was 15. You will ride behind me, or we will stay here another day. Your choice." Thomas knew when he was beaten. Behind you it is. They broke camp systematically, packing away supplies and erasing signs of their presence. Delilah helped Thomas into his mended shirt, and he ran his fingers over her careful stitches. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for all of this, for saving my life." "You are welcome." She met his eyes, and the moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then she turned away, busying herself with the last of the packing. "Come on, we have a long ride ahead." Mounting the mare behind Delilah proved awkward but manageable. Thomas wrapped his good arm around her waist, and she clicked her tongue, setting the horse into a steady walk. The motion jarred his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. The journey to the ranch took most of the day. They stopped twice to rest and water the horse, and each time Thomas felt a little stronger. Delilah navigated the terrain with confidence, reading the land like a book. She pointed out landmarks and signs, teaching him the way she saw the world. "That rock formation means we are close to the boundary of the Johnson spread," she explained, pointing to a distinctive outcropping. "And see how the sage grows thicker there? That means water underground, even if you cannot see it on the surface." "Your father taught you well." "My father and the land itself. You can learn a lot if you pay attention." The sun was low on the horizon when they crested a rise and saw the ranch below. It was a modest operation, a main house, and a barn with a few outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and food. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, shading his eyes against the setting sun. He was in his 40s, stocky and weathered, with a rifle in his hands. "Hello, the house," Delilah called out. "We are in need of help. This man has been shot." The rancher, who introduced himself as Samuel Parker, helped Thomas down from the horse and into the house, where his wife Martha fussed over the wound and insisted on redressing it with proper medical supplies. Their 2 young sons watched wide-eyed from the doorway until Martha shooed them away. "You did good work," Martha told Delilah, examining the wound. "Kept it clean and bound tight. He is lucky you found him." "I was in the right place at the right time," Delilah said simply. Samuel Parker offered them beds for the night and a wagon to take them back to Carson City in the morning. Over dinner, Thomas and Delilah explained what had happened, leaving out only Delilah's real reason for being in the hills. "Outlaws have been getting bold lately," Samuel said, shaking his head. "The law cannot be everywhere, and they know it. You are lucky they did not finish you off, son." "Lucky that Miss Warren came along when she did," Thomas agreed, catching Delilah's eye across the table. That night, Martha set Delilah up in their daughter's room, the girl being married and moved to Virginia City. Thomas was given a cot in the barn, which suited him fine. The hay was soft and the space was warm from the animals. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the past few days. In the house, Delilah also found sleep elusive. She stood at the window, looking out at the stars, and wondered what would happen when they reached Carson City. Thomas would return to his ranch, she would return to her father's, and life would go on as before. Except it would not be the same, would it? Something had changed during those days in the alcove. Something had taken root. The wagon ride to Carson City took most of the next day. Samuel Parker drove, with Martha beside him and Thomas and Delilah in the back, surrounded by sacks of grain that the Parkers were delivering to the mill. The motion was gentler than horseback, and Thomas found he could almost relax leaning against the grain sacks with his eyes half closed. Delilah sat across from him, and every time he opened his eyes he found her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Concern, yes, but something more. Something that made his heart beat faster despite the lingering pain in his shoulder. "What will you tell your father?" he asked quietly, pitching his voice below the creak of the wagon wheels. "The truth mostly. That I came across a wounded man and helped him. He does not need to know I was out chasing mustangs." She glanced toward the Parkers, who were deep in their own conversation. "What about you?" Will you go after the men who shot you? No point. They could be anywhere by now, and I have got no proof of who they were. I will report it to the sheriff, but I do not expect much to come of it. He shifted, trying to ease the ache in his shoulder. I just want to get home, heal up, and get back to my horses. Sensible. Is that disappointment I hear? Maybe a little. I thought all cowboys were supposed to be hot-headed and vengeful. But she smiled as she said it, taking the sting from the words. They reached Carson City as the sun began its descent, painting the dusty streets in gold. The Parkers dropped them at the doctor's office over Thomas's protests. You need a proper examination, Delilah insisted, and I need to send word to my father before he forms a search party. Dr. Henry Whitmore, a thin man with spectacles and gentle hands, examined Thomas's wound and declared Delilah's field medicine sound. Keep it clean, change the dressing daily, and do not lift anything heavy for at least 2 weeks. You will have a scar, but you will live. See, Delilah said to Thomas as they left the doctor's office, I told you I knew what I was doing. I never doubted you. Thomas paused on the wooden sidewalk, suddenly reluctant to part ways. Will you let me buy you dinner? It is the least I can do. My father will be expecting me. Then let me walk you home, please. Delilah studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but only because you are injured and might need someone to catch you if you fall over. They walked through the bustling streets of Carson City as evening settled over the town. Oil lamps flickered to life in windows, and the saloons were just beginning to fill with men finishing their day's work. Thomas was acutely aware of Delilah beside him, the way people's eyes followed them with curiosity. The Warren house sat on the east side of town, a substantial 2-story building with a wide porch and well-tended flower beds. Before they reached the front gate, the door burst open and a man strode out, his weathered face tight with worry. Delilah Rose Warren, where have you been? Her father's voice carried clearly down the street. Your cousin sent word this morning that you never arrived. I have been beside myself. I am sorry, Papa. Delilah's voice remained steady, though Thomas saw her straighten her shoulders. I came across a man who had been shot, and I could not leave him to die. This is Thomas McCarthy. Duncan Warren's eyes moved to Thomas, and his expression shifted from anger to assessment. You are the horse breeder from north of town. Yes, sir. Thomas stood as straight as his wound allowed. Your daughter saved my life. I owe her everything. Is this true? Duncan asked Delilah. I found him bleeding in the hills and tended his wound until we could reach help. We stayed with the Parker family last night and came straight here from the doctor's office. She met her father's gaze squarely. I know you are angry that I lied about where I was going, but I will not apologize for helping someone in need. Duncan Warren looked between them, and Thomas saw the moment the man's anger gave way to something else, pride perhaps mixed with lingering worry. Come inside, both of you. I want to hear the whole story. Over coffee and pie provided by Agnes, the Warren family's housekeeper, Delilah and Thomas recounted the events of the past days. Duncan listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grave as he learned about the ambush and Thomas's injury. These lawless elements are becoming a real problem, he said when they finished. The sheriff does not have enough men to patrol all the routes. Ranchers and travelers alike are at risk. Maybe that is something the ranchers could address together, Thomas suggested. Pool resources, hire additional men to ride patrol. That is not a bad idea. Duncan studied Thomas with new interest. How is your horse operation doing, McCarthy? Growing steadily. I have got 20 head right now, and I'm breeding for endurance and temperament. The mining companies need sturdy animals, and the Army is always buying. I might have some business to discuss with you when you are healed up. The Double W could use fresh blood in our remuda. Duncan stood, extending his hand. Thank you for being honest with me about what happened, and thank you for bringing my daughter home safely. She brought me home safely, sir. I was just along for the ride. Duncan almost smiled at that. Delilah. Walk Mr. McCarthy out. Then you and I are going to have a longer conversation about honesty and trust. On the porch, with the door closed behind them, Delilah turned to Thomas. He is going to lecture me for hours. You can handle it. I know. She looked up at him, and in the lamplight from the house her eyes were soft. Will I see you again? I would like that. Very much. Thomas reached for her hand, then hesitated. If you would like it too. I would. She closed the distance and took his hand, her fingers warm in his. Come back when you are healed. We will talk about horses and business and whatever else comes to mind. I will come back. He squeezed her hand gently. Count on it. The walk back to his ranch, which he made slowly and carefully, gave Thomas plenty of time to think about Delilah's courage and competence, about the way she had cared for him without asking for anything in return, about how right it had felt to have her near. He had been alone since coming to Nevada, focused entirely on building his ranch and his reputation. But now he found himself thinking about what it might be like to share that life with someone like Delilah Warren. The next 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Thomas followed the doctor's orders, letting his hired hand Jake handle the heavy work while he focused on the business side of the operation. He wrote letters to potential buyers, updated his breeding records, and planned for the spring foaling season. But always in the back of his mind was Delilah. He saw her twice during that time, brief encounters in town that left him wanting more. The first time she was with her father at the feed store, and they exchanged only polite greetings. The second time he found her at the post office, and they spoke for perhaps 5 minutes before her father's ranch hand came to collect her. Papa's keeping me close to home, she said apologetically. He's not angry anymore, but he is watching me like a hawk. Can I call on you? Thomas asked. Properly, I mean, with your father's permission. Her face lit up. I would like that. And so, 3 weeks after Delilah had found him bleeding in the hills, Thomas McCarthy, dressed in his best clothes, borrowed a buggy from his neighbor and drove to the Warren house with his heart pounding and a bouquet of wildflowers on the seat beside him. Duncan Warren answered the door himself. McCarthy, I wondered when you would show up. I have come to ask permission to court your daughter, sir. Court her, eh? Duncan's expression was unreadable. Come in, let us talk. They sat in Duncan's study, a room lined with books and ledgers, and spoke for nearly an hour. Duncan asked pointed questions about Thomas's finances, his plans for the future, his character and reputation. Thomas answered honestly, holding nothing back. My daughter is headstrong, Duncan said finally. She has her mother's spirit and her own mind. She will not be an easy woman to be married to. I would not want easy. I would want her. Duncan studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right then. You have my permission to court her, but I warn you, McCarthy, if you hurt her, you will answer to me. I would expect nothing less, sir. Delilah was waiting in the parlor, wearing a blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair pinned up in a style that was somehow both proper and rebellious. When Thomas entered, her face broke into a smile that made his breath catch. Hello, she said. Hello? He held out the wildflowers. These are for you. They are beautiful. She took them, burying her face in the blooms for a moment. Where are we going? I thought we could take a drive. There is a place by the river I wanted to show you. They drove out of town in the borrowed buggy, and for the first few minutes neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, but charged with awareness and possibility. I missed you, Thomas said finally. I missed you too. Delilah turned to look at him. These past weeks I kept thinking about those days in the hills, about how strange it was that something terrible, you being shot, led to something good. Me too. He guided the horse onto a smaller trail that led toward the Carson River. I have been thinking that maybe everything happens for a reason. Maybe I was meant to get shot so that you would find me. That is a romantic notion for a practical horse breeder. Maybe you bring out the romantic in me. They reached the river as the sun began to set, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas helped Delilah down from the buggy, and they walked along the bank talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her dreams of running the ranch someday, of proving to her father that she was capable. He told her about his plans to expand his operation, about wanting to breed the finest horses in Nevada. "I want to see your ranch," Delilah said as they sat on a fallen log watching the river flow past. "I want to see these horses you are so proud of. Come tomorrow. I will give you the full tour and you can tell me what you think. It is a date." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Carson City had seen before. Thomas and Delilah did not just sit in parlors and exchange pleasantries. They worked together, rode together, talked for hours about their shared love of horses and the land. Thomas taught her what he knew about breeding lines and conformation. Delilah shared her knowledge of the range and the wild herds. Duncan Warren watched it all with a mixture of approval and resignation. "I always knew I would lose her to someone eventually," he told Thomas one evening when the younger man came to dinner. "I am glad it is someone who appreciates her for who she is." Not everyone in town approved. There were whispers about how unconventional their courtship was, how improper for a young lady to spend so much time alone with a man on his ranch. But Delilah ignored the gossip, and Thomas respected her too much to care what narrow minds thought. 2 months after their first proper date, Thomas took Delilah back to the alcove where she had found him. They rode out together, her on her mare and him on a new gelding, and picked their way through the familiar terrain. "I wanted to see it again," Thomas explained as they dismounted. "The place where my life changed." "Mine too," Delilah said softly. She walked around the small space, running her hand over the rock wall where they had sheltered. "It seems smaller than I remembered." "But no less important." Thomas came to stand beside her. "Delilah, I need to tell you something." "You sound serious." "I am serious. I am seriously in love with you." He took her hands in his. "I have been falling for you since I woke up and saw you mending my shirt, caring for me when you had no reason to accept basic human decency. You are strong and brave and smart, and you make me want to be a better man. I know we have not been courting long, but I also know what I feel, and I know what I want." "What do you want?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I want you to marry me. I want us to build a life together, to combine your knowledge and my skills and create something amazing. I want to see you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want everything with you, if you will have me." Delilah's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Thomas McCarthy. I love you too. Have loved you probably since you did not complain once about me bossing you around when you were injured." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, with the setting sun painting the rocks around them in fire. It was not their first kiss, but it was the one that sealed their promise to each other. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Carson City. Duncan Warren walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and half the town turned out to witness the union. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers like the ones Thomas had brought her on their first date. The reception was held at the Warren house, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. But Thomas and Delilah left before midnight, driving a wagon loaded with Delilah's belongings to their new home. Thomas had spent weeks preparing the ranch house for his bride. He had cleaned every corner, bought new curtains, and built her a hope chest as a wedding present. But when they arrived and he carried her over the threshold, Delilah barely looked at any of it. "Show me tomorrow," she said, pulling him close. "Tonight I just want you." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and laughing and deeply connected. Afterward, lying in Thomas's bed, now their bed, Delilah traced the scar on his shoulder. "I am glad I found you," she whispered. "I am glad you did not give up on me," Thomas replied, kissing her forehead. The months that followed were not without challenges. Combining their lives meant compromise and adjustment. Delilah had to learn to run a household on a smaller scale than her father's ranch, and Thomas had to adapt to sharing decisions with someone else. But they worked through every difficulty together, with patience and love. Delilah proved invaluable to the horse operation. She had an eye for quality animals and a gift for training that complemented Thomas's breeding expertise. Together, they started to build a reputation that spread beyond Carson City. Orders came in from as far as Sacramento and Salt Lake City. Duncan Warren became a regular visitor, often arriving with advice or supplies or just an excuse to check on his daughter. But his protectiveness had evolved into respect, and he treated Thomas like a son. "You are good for her," he told Thomas one evening, as they worked together to repair a fence. "She is happy in a way I have not seen since her mother was alive." "She is good for me too," Thomas replied. "Makes me better than I ever thought I could be." The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. They survived a harsh winter, celebrated successful foaling season, and grew closer with each passing day. Delilah never regretted her choice to leave her father's substantial ranch for Thomas's smaller operation. This was hers in a way the Double W never could be. She was a partner here, not just a daughter. It was in their second year of marriage that Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after dinner, simply taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said, watching his face. Thomas's expression went through a series of changes: shock, joy, fear, and then settling on pure love. "A baby. We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms, careful to be gentle. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful." "When?" "Early spring, the doctor thinks." Thomas kissed her, slow and deep. "We need to expand the house, add another room, and we will need a crib and blankets and—" "We have time," Delilah laughed. "But yes, we should probably start preparing." The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah suffered through morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and as she grew larger, the physical work she loved became more difficult. But she remained involved in every aspect of the ranch, just adapting her activities to her changing body. Thomas was constantly worried, hovering over her until she finally snapped at him one afternoon. "I am pregnant, not dying. Stop treating me like I am made of glass. I just want you to be safe. You and the baby both." "We will be safe. But I need to keep living my life, Thomas. I cannot spend the next 4 months sitting in a chair doing nothing. I will go mad." They compromised. Delilah continued to work, but stayed away from the most strenuous tasks. She focused on training and record keeping, things that kept her involved without risking her health. Thomas took on extra work, often pushing himself too hard to compensate. It was during this time that the wild Mustang herd appeared on their land. Thomas spotted them first early one morning when he was checking the perimeter fence. A dozen horses, including a stallion that gleamed golden in the rising sun. He ran back to the house, calling for Delilah. "The golden stallion! He is here on our land!" Delilah, now 8 months pregnant and moving slowly, still insisted on coming to see. They walked out together, and she gasped when she saw the herd. The golden stallion stood alert, his coat catching the light like polished metal. "He is real," she breathed. "He is really real." Legend made flesh. Thomas wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You were right to believe." They watched the herd until it moved on, disappearing into the hills. But the sighting felt like a blessing, a confirmation that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their son was born on a stormy March night, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected. The labor was long and difficult, and Thomas paced the floor while the midwife and doctor worked with Delilah in the bedroom. Duncan Warren sat with him, offering silent support. "She is strong," Duncan said when Thomas's pacing became frantic. "She comes from strong stock. She will be fine." And she was. As dawn broke over the Nevada hills, a baby's cry filled the house. Thomas was allowed into the room to find Delilah exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle. "We have a son," she said, "a healthy, perfect son." Thomas knelt beside the bed, looking at the tiny face of his child. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. I do not have words for what I'm feeling right now." Me neither. Delilah stroked the baby's dark hair. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Thomas thought of the place where his life had truly begun. Carson, he said. Carson Duncan McCarthy, after the city where we built our life, and after your father. Delilah's eyes filled with tears. It is perfect. Duncan Warren, invited in to meet his grandson, was rendered speechless for perhaps the first time in his life. He held the baby with shaking hands and tears ran unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. Your mother would be so proud, he told Delilah, so very proud of the woman you have become, of the life you have built. The weeks after Carson's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Delilah recovered slowly, and Thomas threw himself into caring for both his wife and son while still trying to keep the ranch running. They hired a young woman from town to help with the housework, which gave Delilah the rest she needed. As spring turned to summer, they fell into a new rhythm. Carson was a good baby, sleeping in long stretches and rarely fussing. Delilah began to regain her strength, and by the time the boy was 3 months old, she was back to working alongside Thomas, with Carson in a basket nearby. We are quite a team, Thomas said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Carson slept in Delilah's arms. You, me, and this little one. The best team. Delilah leaned against her husband's shoulder. Do you ever think about that day in the alcove, about how this all started? All the time. I think about you bent over my shirt, mending something broken, and I think about how you have spent the past 2 years doing the same thing for me, mending all the broken pieces I did not even know I had. You did the same for me. She kissed his cheek. I was so trapped before I met you, so desperate to prove I was more than just Duncan Warren's daughter. You gave me the freedom to be myself. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Inside the house, the lamp burned warm and steady. The horses nickered softly in the barn. Everything was exactly as it should be. The years that followed brought both joy and hardship, as all lives do. There were difficult winters and dry summers. There were years when the horses sold well and years when money was tight, but Thomas and Delilah faced it all together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. 2 years after Carson's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Elena Rose, named for Delilah's mother. She had her mother's determination and her father's gentle nature, and she kept them all on their toes from the moment she could crawl. Duncan Warren, now in his 60s, began to slow down. He spent more and more time at Thomas and Delilah's ranch, teaching his grandchildren to ride and passing on the wisdom of his years. When he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, Thomas and Delilah inherited the Double W. They merged the two operations, creating one of the largest and most successful horse ranches in Nevada. But they never forgot their roots, the small ranch where their life together had truly begun. They kept the original house, and sometimes on quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch where Thomas had first told Delilah he loved her. Carson grew into a fine young man, serious and hard-working like his father, but with his mother's fierce independence. Elena was all fire and laughter, determined to do everything her older brother could do and usually succeeding. They were joined eventually by another son, Michael, and then by another daughter, Sarah. The house that Thomas had built grew with each addition, expanding to hold their growing family. As Thomas and Delilah aged, they watched their children grow and start families of their own. Carson took over the primary management of the ranch, proving himself a worthy successor. Elena married a rancher from California and moved away, though she visited often with her own children. Michael became a veterinarian, using his skills to help not just the family ranch but ranchers throughout the territory. Sarah, the youngest, inherited her mother's gift with horses and became known throughout the West for her training abilities. Through it all, Thomas and Delilah remained devoted to each other. They had built something lasting, not just in land and livestock, but in the love they shared and the family they had created. Every evening, weather permitting, they would walk together around the property hand in hand, talking about the day and making plans for tomorrow. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Thomas organized a celebration that brought together family and friends from across Nevada, but his real gift to Delilah was private, given to her that morning before the guests arrived. "Close your eyes," he said, leading her outside. "What are you up to, Thomas McCarthy?" "You will see. Keep them closed." He led her across the yard and then stopped. "All right, open them." Delilah opened her eyes to find herself standing in front of a new building, small but beautifully constructed. Above the door hung a sign that read Delilah's Workshop. "What is this?" she asked, though she was already smiling. "Your own space, for sewing, for reading, for whatever you want. I know the house gets crowded with all the grandchildren visiting, and I thought you might like a place that is just yours." He handed her a key. "Happy anniversary." Delilah threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at once. "It is perfect. You are perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "I am the lucky one." Thomas held her close. "You mended my torn shirt while I was sleeping, and when I woke up I found not just your needle working, but I found my entire future sitting there in the firelight. You saved more than my life that day, Delilah. You saved me." "We saved each other," she corrected, reaching up to kiss him. "And we built something beautiful together." That night, as the party wound down and their children and grandchildren prepared to leave, Thomas and Delilah stood together on the porch one more time. The stars spread across the Nevada sky, bright and infinite. "Do you have any regrets?" Thomas asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Not a single one." Delilah laced her fingers through his. "Every choice led me here, to you, to this life. I would not change a thing." "Not even the lying to your father about tracking Mustangs? Especially not that." She laughed. "If I had not been chasing legends, I would never have found the greatest truth of my life. That love is worth the risk. Always." They stood together as the last wagons pulled away, watching until the lanterns disappeared into the distance. Then they went inside to the home they had built together, to the bed they had shared for a quarter century. Years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations, by the arrival of great-grandchildren and the inevitable losses that come with time. But through it all, Thomas and Delilah remained partners in every sense of the word. They worked together, laughed together, weathered storms together. When Thomas was 73, he developed a persistent cough that the doctors could not quite cure. Delilah nursed him through the worst of it, just as she had nursed him through that first wound so many years ago. This time, though, there was no dramatic recovery. The cough faded, but Thomas was never quite the same. He moved slower, tired more easily. "I am getting old," he admitted to Delilah one evening. "We both are," she replied. "It is the privilege of those who survive long enough. We have had a good run, Thomas." "The best?" He took her hand, still fitting perfectly in his after all these years. "But I am not done yet. I have got too much to stick around for." And stick around he did, for another decade. Thomas McCarthy lived to see his 83rd birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He was still sharp-minded and quick-witted, even if his body had betrayed him with age. Delilah, at 80, was still beautiful in Thomas's eyes. Her dark hair had gone silver, and lines marked her face. But when she smiled at him, he saw the same woman who had mended his shirt by firelight, who had saved his life and then changed it completely. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a gathering that brought family from as far as San Francisco and Denver. The ranch, now run primarily by their grandchildren, thrived. The McCarthy name was synonymous with quality horses throughout the West, but the greatest legacy Thomas and Delilah left was not measured in acres or animals. It was measured in the love they had shared, in the example they had set for their children and grandchildren. They had shown what was possible when two people committed to building a life together, when they respected and supported each other as equals. On a warm September evening, as autumn began to paint the Nevada hills in gold, Thomas and Delilah sat together on their porch. It was the same porch where they had sat thousands of times before, but this evening felt different somehow. Special. "Do you remember," Thomas said softly, "on the first time I told you I loved you? At the alcove. How could I forget? I meant every word then, and I mean them even more now. I love you, Delilah McCarthy. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are mine." She squeezed his hand. "Whatever comes next, Thomas, we face it together. Just like we always have." "Together," he agreed. "Always together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Around them, the ranch they had built hummed with life. In the barn, their great-grandson was feeding the horses. In the main house, their granddaughter was cooking dinner for the family. The sounds of children playing drifted across the yard. It was perfect, Thomas thought. All of it. The hard work and the struggles had been worth it for moments like this, for the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, and Thomas wrapped his arm around her. They had grown old together, had weathered every storm side by side, and they would continue to do so for whatever time they had left. As the stars began to appear overhead, Thomas thought back to that day in the alcove, when he had woken to find a stranger mending his torn shirt. He had been running from his past then, trying to build something new in the West. He had not known he was also running toward his future. But Delilah had been waiting there, needle in hand, ready to mend not just his shirt, but his whole life. She had taken a broken man and helped him become whole. And in return, he had given her the freedom and partnership she had always craved. It had been 53 years since that day, but the memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday. The firelight, the rhythmic motion of her needle, the quiet competence in every movement. That was the moment everything changed, even if neither of them knew it at the time. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, breaking into his reverie. "That day you found me. How different my life would be if you had not been tracking that golden stallion. Did I ever tell you that I saw him again? The golden stallion?" Delilah's voice was soft with memory. "It was years later, maybe 10 years after we married. I was riding the north pasture alone, and there he was. Still golden, still wild. He looked right at me, and I swear it was like he knew me, like he was checking to make sure I was happy." "And were you? Are you?" "The happiest woman alive, then and now." She lifted her head to look at him. "You gave me everything I ever wanted, Thomas. Adventure and partnership and love. A life of my own making." "We gave each other that," Thomas corrected. "I could not have built any of this without you." They remained on the porch long after the sun disappeared, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, talking and laughing and reminiscing. Their granddaughter called them in for dinner eventually, scolding them gently about the cold, but both Thomas and Delilah were reluctant to move. "Just a few more minutes," Delilah said. "It is so beautiful out here tonight." And it was. The stars blazed overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the birth of their children. The land stretched out before them, familiar and beloved. This was home in every sense of the word. Inside, the family gathered for dinner, 3 generations sitting down together to share food and stories. Thomas looked around the table at faces that carried his features and Delilah's, at the children who would carry their legacy forward into the future. "I want to make a toast," he said, raising his glass of water, "to family, to the land, and to the woman who saved my life and then made it worth living. To Delilah." "To Delilah," the family echoed, and she blushed like a young bride. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Thomas helped Delilah prepare for bed, a nightly ritual they had shared for decades. He carefully brushed out her long silver hair, counting each stroke the way he had when it was still dark as midnight. "I have been thinking," Delilah said as he worked, "we should go back to the alcove one more time." "Are you sure?" It is a hard ride, and we are not as young as we used to be. I know, but I want to see it again. Want to stand in the place where our story began. She met his eyes in the mirror. Will you take me? Of course. We will go next week, when the weather is clear. Carson can drive us in the wagon most of the way. They made the journey the following week, accompanied by their son and 2 of their grandchildren. The wagon took them as far as possible, and then Thomas and Delilah, leaning on walking sticks, made the final climb on foot. The alcove was smaller than Thomas remembered, weathered by years of wind and rain, but it was still there, still recognizable. He helped Delilah sit on a rock and then lowered himself beside her. It all started here, Delilah said, looking around. You were dying, and I was chasing legends. And we both found what we needed. I found someone to save me. You found someone who saw you for who you really were. Thomas took her hand. This place is sacred to me. It is where I was reborn. They sat together for a long time, remembering and reflecting. Their son and grandchildren kept a respectful distance, giving them privacy. When they finally rose to leave, Thomas took one last look at the alcove. Thank you, he said softly, though he was not sure who he was thanking. Fate, perhaps, or the universe, or just the wild chance that had brought Delilah to this exact place at this exact time. The return journey was slower, but filled with contentment. Thomas and Delilah held hands in the back of the wagon, watching the Nevada landscape roll past. They had spent their entire lives in this country, had raised their family and built their fortune here. It was in their blood now, part of who they were. As they approached the ranch, the sun was setting once again, painting everything in that golden light that Thomas had always loved. He squeezed Delilah's hand, and she turned to smile at him. I love you, he said. Have I told you that today? Only 3 times, but I never get tired of hearing it. Good, because I plan to keep saying it for as long as I live. And I plan to keep listening. They lived 5 more years together after that final visit to the alcove. 5 years of sunrises and sunsets, of family gatherings and quiet evenings on the porch. 5 years of continuing to build their legacy and love each other as deeply as ever. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88, with Delilah beside him holding his hand. His funeral brought together hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, and the stories shared that day painted a picture of a man who was honest, hard-working, and deeply devoted to his family. But it was Delilah's words that captured the essence of who Thomas McCarthy had been. Standing at his grave, she spoke to the assembled crowd with a steady voice, though tears ran down her face. Thomas and I met in the most unlikely way, she said. I found him broken and bleeding, and I mended his torn shirt while he slept. When he woke and saw me there with my needle working, neither of us knew it was the beginning of the greatest love story I could have imagined. We built a life together, a family, a legacy. But more than that, we built a partnership based on respect and equality and deep, abiding love. He was my best friend, my partner, my heart. And though I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, I am grateful beyond words for the 58 years we had together. Delilah lived another 7 years after Thomas's death, remaining active and involved in the ranch until the very end. She spent her days with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories of her life with Thomas, ensuring that their love story would never be forgotten. On her 95th birthday, surrounded by family, Delilah held court from her chair on the porch of the house she and Thomas had built. 4 generations had gathered to celebrate her, and she looked at each face with love and pride. We have been blessed, she told them. Your grandfather and I, we started with nothing but love and determination, and look what we built, all of you, this land, this legacy. Promise me you will remember that love is the foundation of everything. Without it, all the land and money in the world mean nothing. They promised, and Delilah was satisfied. She passed away peacefully 3 months later in her sleep, just as Thomas had. The family buried her beside her husband under the Nevada sky they had both loved so much, and on her headstone, below her name and dates, they inscribed the words that summarized her entire life. She mended his torn shirt while he was sleeping. Together, they mended each other's hearts. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, the McCarthy name remaining synonymous with quality and integrity. But more than the business success, Thomas and Delilah's true legacy lived on in the way their children and grandchildren approached their own relationships. They had set an example of what marriage could be when built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering commitment. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the light was just right, workers on the ranch swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand across the land, checking on the horses, pausing to watch the sunset. The golden stallion appeared occasionally too, though he was surely long dead, his descendants carrying on his wild bloodline in the hills. But legends never really die, not when they are built on something as enduring as love. And the legend of Thomas McCarthy and Delilah Warren McCarthy, of the cowboy who woke to find a woman mending his torn shirt and fell in love with her courage and competence, became a story passed down through generations. It was told at weddings and whispered to young couples just starting out. It was a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that sometimes being broken is exactly what you need to become whole, and that the simple act of caring for another person, of mending what is torn, can change two lives forever. The alcove where it all began eventually became a place of pilgrimage for the McCarthy family. Young couples would visit it before their weddings, sitting in the same spot where Thomas and Delilah had sheltered from the storm, hoping to capture even a fraction of the magic that had happened there. And the ranch itself stood as a monument to what two people could build when they worked together as true partners. Every fence post, every barn, every house bore the mark of Thomas and Delilah's combined efforts. They had transformed rough Nevada land into something beautiful and productive, just as they had transformed each other from lonely individuals into halves of a perfect whole. Their story became part of the fabric of Carson City's history, told alongside tales of silver strikes and railroad expansion. Because while those things shaped the economic fortunes of the region, it was stories like Thomas and Delilah's that shaped the hearts of the people who lived there. And in the end, that was the real treasure. Not the land or the money or even the successful business they had built. The real treasure was the love they had shared, the family they had raised, and the example they had set. They had proved that it was possible to find your soulmate in the most unlikely circumstances, and that with commitment and effort, love could not only survive but thrive even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West. The needle that Delilah had used to mend Thomas's shirt that first night was preserved by the family, passed down from generation to generation as a symbol of their love story. And with it came the reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest impacts, that caring for someone in their moment of need can open the door to a lifetime of happiness. Thomas and Delilah McCarthy had lived and loved and built something that lasted long after they were gone. Their story was one of courage and determination, of finding love in unexpected places, of building a life together that was greater than either could have achieved alone. They had started with a torn shirt and a needle, and from those humble beginnings they had created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. And that, in the end, was the greatest love story the Wild West had ever known.